The hum of the reactor was the kind of sound you stopped hearing after a few years at sea. It was steady, deep, like the slow heartbeat of a sleeping beast. And on the bridge of the Harrow, Captain Grant had learned to trust it more than he trusted most people. Outside the hull, the void stretched in all directions, black, endless, and deceptively calm. The crew moved with a quiet efficiency, born from too many months without shore leave. Each man and woman locked into routines that dulled the edges of boredom, but kept them ready for trouble. Trouble came faster than anyone expected. It started as a blip on the tactical array, small, faint, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. Lieutenant Harris, the ship's sensor officer, frowned at it for a long second before calling out, "Captain, I've got multiple returns, bearing 172 high velocity." Grant leaned over the display. The contacts weren't human. Their drive signatures were wrong, too clean, too sharp, and there were a lot of them. At least 100 ships, maybe more, all closing in tight formation. He didn't need Harris to confirm the obvious. This wasn't a merchant convoy, and it sure as hell wasn't a diplomatic visit. The comms crackled. "Unknown fleet. This is the United Earthship Harrow. Identify yourselves immediately or alter course." Silence. Grant straightened, eyes narrowing. "Put all weapons on standby. Keep shields cold until I say otherwise." He wanted them thinking Harrow was just another heavy cruiser drifting through the sector. When the alien reply finally came, it wasn't on any frequency humans used. The translator systems kicked in halfway through the transmission, catching only fragments. "Primitive species. Surrender. Extinction assured." The voice was deep and guttural, each word carrying a weight of contempt. A ripple of tension moved through the bridge crew. Harris muttered something under his breath, and the gunnery chief actually grinned. "Captain," Harris said, "their lead vessel's moving into weapons range." Grant took a slow breath. 100 alien warships against one human vessel. It wasn't even supposed to be a fight. On paper, Harrow should have been reduced to slag before they got a shot off, but paper didn't know about the new railgun arrays hidden under the dorsal plating. It didn't know about the grav shears bolted into the spine of the ship, or the tungsten projectiles that could cut through armor like tissue. And the aliens sure as hell didn't know either. "Lock targeting solutions on the first 10 ships," Grant said calmly. "No warning shots." There was no more talk after that, just the hiss of the targeting computers coming online, the faint rumble of the reactor spooling to combat output, and the sudden thump of adrenaline in every chest. The alien fleet shifted formation, their ships bristling with weapons. The lead vessel opened fire, bright lances of energy lighting up the darkness. The Harrow didn't move. Her shields flared for a heartbeat, soaking the hits. "Fire!" The bridge lit up with the deep roar of the railguns, each shot a streak of blue-white light vanishing into the black. The first alien ship simply came apart. No fire. No explosion, just debris scattering into the void as the projectile tore straight through its core. The second ship followed a heartbeat later, then the third. By the time the aliens realized they were dying faster than they could maneuver, Harrow had already erased the first 10 targets. The void was full of drifting wreckage and flashes of vented atmosphere, and Grant hadn't even stood up from his chair. The alien flagship had been broadcasting a steady stream of tactical data across their fleet until the Harrow's first salvo. Now that channel was fractured, cut by bursts of static and sudden silence, as one ship after another winked off the network. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Vorsk of the Dravari Empire stared at the holo-display in disbelief. It wasn't possible. The human vessel, if this primitive species' clumsy metal shell even deserved the title, had destroyed 10 warships in less than 15 seconds. Vorsk's ships weren't lightly armed patrol craft. They were the spearhead of an imperial conquest fleet, each one armed with enough firepower to glass a planet's surface in a matter of hours. And yet, they had been erased. No warning, no visible build-up, no gradual wearing down of defenses. Just one instant they were alive, and the next they were torn apart, their armored hulls split like the shells of soft fruit. The Dravari admiral's second-in-command leaned closer, mandibles clicking in agitation. "Admiral, our scans detect mass driver projectiles, but their velocity, it exceeds recorded tolerances. No known drive system could—" "Silence!" Vorsk snapped. "That vessel is a deception, a trap laid by a greater power. These humans are not capable of such engineering." A new burst of static filled the air as 3 more ships were lost. The tactical display was bleeding red icons at a rate that made Vorsk's stomach knot. His mind was trained for war, for strategy, for the patient dismantling of an opponent's will to fight. But what was unfolding was not war. It was slaughter. On the Harrow, Captain Grant didn't even glance at the kill count display. He didn't care about numbers. Numbers made you complacent. They made you think you were winning because the math said so. Grant only cared about momentum, keeping it, driving it forward, crushing the enemy before they could adapt. The gunnery chief's voice came over the comm. "Captain, primary rails are hot. Reload cycle steady. Do you want to maintain firing sequence on the heavy ships or split fire to cripple their escorts?" Grant studied the formation. The aliens were tightening their ranks, but in doing so, they were making themselves perfect targets. "Maintain on heavies. Escorts can't win this without their teeth." The next volley hit harder than the first. 4 heavy cruisers in the center of the alien fleet were gutted, their reactors going critical in blinding flashes. The blast waves ripped into surrounding ships, tearing shields apart and scattering debris across the void. The Harrow's bridge stayed quiet, except for the soft beeps of targeting locks and the rhythmic thrum of the railguns. To an outsider, the calm might have seemed eerie, even inhuman, but to Grant's crew, it was the sound of absolute control. "Captain," Harris said from the sensor station, "enemy formation is breaking. I'm reading—" He stopped mid-sentence. His hands froze over the controls. "They're hailing us." Grant's eyebrow lifted. "Open channel. Let's hear what the predators sound like when they're choking on their own pride." The alien voice came through, thick with static but still dripping contempt. "Human vessel, cease fire. You have inflicted unacceptable losses. We will allow your species to submit to Dravari authority without further—" Grant cut the transmission with a flick of his hand. "Target their flagship." On the Dravari bridge, Admiral Vorsk felt a flicker of unease he would never admit aloud. The human captain had not even responded. No negotiation, no boasting, not even the primitive urge to gloat. The silence was worse than threats. A shrill alarm rang out across the flagship's bridge. Weapons officer clicks translated into urgency. "Incoming projectile, no time to evade." The railgun slug hit the Dravari flagship dead on. Its shields flared white-hot and collapsed instantly. The slug punched through the forward hull, slicing through bulkheads and venting entire decks into space before it exited out the aft section. There was no massive explosion, no dramatic fireball, just a gaping wound and a sudden, catastrophic loss of pressure. Vorsk's claws dug into the armrests of his command throne. Around him, crew members scrambled, trying to stabilize power. He knew it was futile. The human warship hadn't fired an energy beam that could be deflected or dissipated. It had thrown a piece of metal faster than most ships could imagine moving, and nothing in the Dravari arsenal could stop it. "Signal all ships," Vorsk barked. "Scatter formation. Overwhelm their targeting systems!" But scattering only made them easier to pick off one by one. Grant watched the alien formation break apart. Predictable. "Switch to fire on opportunity," he told the gunnery chief. "No wasted shots. Every round kills something." The Harrow's dorsal turrets tracked and fired in perfect synchronization. One projectile caught a fleeing frigate amidships, slicing it neatly in two. Another tore through the bridge section of a destroyer before it could angle its shields. The aliens fired back, of course, broadside volleys of plasma bolts, lances of coherent light, seeker missiles with tracking systems far more advanced than anything humans had deployed publicly. But Harrow's countermeasures worked flawlessly. The plasma dissipated against the ship's experimental energy skin. The lasers refracted into harmless beams. The missiles picked off by point defense batteries. Grant's crew didn't cheer with each kill. They didn't have to. The satisfaction was in the work, in doing it clean, in watching an enemy who thought themselves invincible crumble in real time. Back on the Dravari flagship, Admiral Vorsk realized something terrible. The humans weren't rushing forward to press the attack. They were staying exactly where they were, controlling range, keeping the fleet at the perfect distance for their weapons to dominate. This was no desperate act of defense. This was precision extermination. "Admiral," one of his aides said, "we must withdraw. This foe is beyond—" "Silence!" Vorsk snarled. Retreat was unthinkable. The Dravari Empire did not flee from prey, and yet, in his heart, Vorsk knew that to stay was to die. Another slug tore through the flagship, severing its comms array. The Dravari Admiral's command net dissolved into chaos. "On the Harrow," Harris reported calmly. "Flagship is crippled. They're blind, sir." Grant nodded slowly. "Good. Let them feel it." For the next 2 minutes, the Harrow dismantled the Dravari fleet like a surgeon taking apart a machine. The railguns fired without pause, each round finding a target with unerring precision. Alien ships tried to hide behind the wreckage of their dead, but the Harrow's targeting systems could see through the metal husks, as if they weren't there. The kill zone widened, debris fields growing until the stars themselves were obscured by drifting metal and frozen corpses. Grant's voice was steady when he finally spoke again. "Transmit to surviving ships. Leave human space. Now. Any vessel remaining in range in 60 seconds will be destroyed." There was no reply. Not from the Dravari Admiral. Not from any ship. But the surviving vessels turned, their engines flaring bright, scattering into the void as fast as their drives could carry them. Grant sat back in his chair, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Weapons stand down. Log engagement time." 4 minutes, 53 seconds, Harris said. The bridge went quiet. Not from shock, not anymore, but from the weight of what had just happened. A single human ship had faced down the pride of an alien empire and won without taking a single serious hit. Grant knew this wasn't the end. The Dravari would be back, and next time they'd come with more than arrogance. But they'd remember this day, and so would every other race watching from the shadows. The Harrow turned slowly, leaving the wreckage of an entire fleet drifting in the cold void. The wreckage field still hung in space like a scar on reality. Even hours after the battle, clouds of debris floated in slow rotation, glinting in the starlight. Broken hull plates, shattered weapon mounts, and the occasional drifting shape that was once a Dravari crewman. The Harrow's sensors tagged each piece for navigation avoidance, but Captain Grant didn't order cleanup. "Let it stay there," he thought. "Let the galaxy see what happens when they come to our door with guns." The bridge was running at half voice. Men and women at their stations spoke in low tones, running post-combat diagnostics and checking systems for damage, but the calm was deceptive. Every man aboard knew they had just pulled off something no one believed possible. A single warship, facing down the spearhead of an alien invasion fleet, and walking away without a scratch. Grant leaned back in the captain's chair, staring at the tactical display. There were no more hostile signatures within range. The survivors had fled in every direction, scattering into the black. Some would limp back to Dravari space with tales of humiliation. Others might disappear entirely. He could already imagine the ripples. Those ripples started sooner than he thought. By the time the Harrow cleared the engagement zone, the first intercepted transmissions were already bouncing through the outer systems. Panicked, confused, and contradictory reports sent by surviving Dravari ships. Grant listened to a fragment over comms. Unprovoked attack, primitive human vessel, impossible weapons, fleet destroyed, request immediate reinforcements. The voice was strained, almost breaking, but what stood out most was the tone. Fear. The Dravari were predators by nature and by history, yet this voice carried the tight, high edge of prey. Grant killed the audio and looked to Harris. "How many channels are we pulling?" 17 separate transmissions, all on different Dravari military bands, Harris said, hands flying over his console. "If they were trying to keep this quiet, they've failed. Anyone with a listening post within 2 sectors is going to hear about it." Grant's mouth twitched in what might have been satisfaction. "Good. Let them talk." In the Dravari core worlds, talk was exactly what happened. News traveled faster than ships in this part of space, through relays, trading ships, smugglers, even deep space listening arrays run by rival empires. And when word spread that the pride of the Dravari fleet had been annihilated in minutes by a single human warship, disbelief was the first reaction. But disbelief didn't last long. The returning survivors brought visual logs, sensor records, and, perhaps most damning, raw battle telemetry showing projectiles moving at velocities no known mass driver system could achieve. The Imperial War Council convened within hours. In the grand chamber of the Spire Citadel, Admiral Vorsk stood before the gathered lords, his body still bearing the faint scars of decompression from the flagship's destruction. His voice was stripped of the arrogance it once carried. "This was no fluke," Vorsk said, his mandibles still. "This was not luck. The human vessel engaged us with weapons beyond our current science, armor that ignored our heaviest bombardment, and a crew that operated with ruthless precision. This was not the act of a backwater species. This was the strike of a predator hiding its teeth until the moment to kill." Some of the lords hissed in disbelief. One barked out, "You fled from a single ship." "I survived," Vorsk snapped back, "because I chose to withdraw what remained of my fleet. Had I stayed, none of us would be here to discuss this threat." The chamber filled with an uneasy, clicking silence. It was rare for a Dravari to admit fear, rarer still for one of their admirals to speak it aloud. Back aboard the Harrow, Grant wasn't thinking about the political storm in Dravari space. He was already thinking about what came next. They'd won the battle, but that victory was a spotlight, not a shield. The moment the Harrow's capabilities became known, every rival power in the region would scramble to either replicate the technology or find a way to counter it. "Sir," Harris said, pulling him from his thoughts, "Fleet Command is requesting a direct report from you. Secure channel, high priority." Grant nodded. "Patch it through to my quarters." In the privacy of his quarters, the face of Admiral Soren appeared on the screen. The older man didn't waste time with formalities. "I've read the battle logs," Soren said. "I don't need to tell you what kind of shockwave this is going to cause." "No, sir," Grant said. "Then I'll tell you something else. You just painted a target on your ship the size of Luna. The Dravari won't take this humiliation lying down, and neither will the others. Expect spies, assassins, sabotage, hell, maybe an entire coalition coming after you just to prove you can be killed." Grant didn't flinch. "They're welcome to try." Soren's mouth twitched. "I figured you'd say that." "Orders are to proceed to Sol for immediate debrief and systems inspection. And Grant, don't engage unless fired upon. I know you like making examples, but the brass is nervous." Grant gave a short nod. Understood. The return trip was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Across human space, news of the Harrow's stand against the Dravari spread just as fast as it had in alien territory. Soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike whispered about it, some calling it proof that humanity had finally claimed its place as a power among the stars, others muttering about the danger of provoking ancient empires. In the spacer bars of Ceres Station, rough-voiced freighter captains raised glasses to the nameless crew that had shredded an alien armada before lunch. On the frontier colonies, fathers told the story to wide-eyed children, already casting Grant and his crew as legends. But there were other whispers too, quieter, sharper. Rumors of other powers probing for weaknesses, sending covert ships to shadow human patrols, reports of Dravari agents seen in ports where they had no business being. And somewhere in the deep black, remnants of the Dravari fleet limped home, not to lick their wounds, but to plan revenge. The Dravari's revenge didn't start with another fleet. It started with fear. Admiral Vorsk's report spread through their military ranks, and with it came an unspoken truth. If the humans had built one ship like the Harrow, they could build more. The Dravari had built their dominance on the certainty that no prey could ever challenge them in a direct fight. That certainty was gone now, so they did what predators do when their dominance is threatened. They began hunting in a different way. Small Dravari ships began appearing in human space, disguised as traders or miners. Human patrol craft reported being shadowed, their transponders pinged by unknown signals. Communications relays were hacked, data siphoned away in the dead of night. And somewhere in the shadows, Dravari scientists tore apart every scrap of sensor data from the battle, desperate to understand the weapon that had slaughtered their fleet in minutes. Grant knew it was coming. He'd seen this play before, on smaller scales, with pirates and raiders who underestimated a target. First came the bluster, then the retreat. Then the quiet probing for weaknesses. And then the strike. He stood in the Harrow's observation deck, looking out at the slow spin of a distant asteroid field. His reflection in the glass was steady, his expression unreadable. "They'll come again," a voice said behind him. It was the gunnery chief, his broad frame filling the doorway. "Yes," Grant said, "and when they do, they'll bring more ships, more guns, more caution." The chief's mouth curled into a slow grin. "Good. Means they'll last longer next time." Grant didn't smile. Or maybe it means they'll actually make it interesting. By the time the Harrow reached Sol, the legend had already grown beyond reality. People spoke of the battle as if it had lasted hours, with the Harrow dancing through enemy fire like some mythic predator. They said the Dravari flagship had been vaporized in a single shot, or that Grant had given them one chance to surrender before unleashing hell. The truth didn't matter anymore. In the minds of millions, humanity had proven itself against one of the galaxy's apex powers, and in the minds of those apex powers, a dangerous question had taken root. If this was what one human warship could do, what would happen when there were 50 or 100? Grant knew the answer. He just didn't know if the galaxy was ready for it. The Dravari didn't rush back into human space. That would have been easy to deal with. Grant almost wished they had. Instead, they came like a slow cancer. First, the missing freighters. Then, the outpost beacons that went dark. Colony miners reported seeing shadow ships on the edge of asteroid belts, vessels with no registered transponders, moving like predators in the gloom. The Harrow was stationed at Luna Dock for debrief and repairs, but repairs were the excuse. The brass wanted to keep Grant under watch while intelligence analysts picked apart the battle data. He could feel the unease in every meeting. Half the admirals wanted him to take the Harrow back into the field as a deterrent. The other half were afraid showing her again would provoke a larger war. Grant knew the truth. The Dravari were already at war. He got confirmation 2 weeks later. It was a transmission from the Perseus frontier, grainy, distorted by heavy jamming. The visual feed showed the colony of Vesper Ridge, a mining settlement carved into the cliffs of an iron-rich moon. Explosions tore through its outer structures, plumes of oxygen venting into the black. On the surface, Dravari dropships touched down, sleek and insect-like, their hulls gleaming in the moonlight. The colony's automated defenses barely got off a dozen shots before they were silenced. The audio feed was worse. Screams, weapons fire, the alien language barking commands. And then the signal cut. Grant stood in the command center at Luna Dock, fists clenched as the playback ended. The room was dead quiet. Admiral Soren was the first to speak. "They're making an example. They want us to react rashly, commit ships to a trap." Grant didn't look away from the dead feed. "Then we react intelligently. Give me Harrow. Let me go hunting." The council exchanged glances. Someone cleared their throat. "We can't afford to risk losing you. That ship is a symbol now." "It's not a symbol," Grant snapped, his voice low but hard enough to cut through the air. "It's a weapon. And if you keep it locked in port while the Dravari butcher our people, you're telling them we're afraid to use it. They'll keep doing this until we stop them." Soren held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You'll have your orders within the hour." When the Harrow left Luna Dock, her hull gleamed from fresh plating. Every system had been tuned to perfection. The crew boarded in silence, their faces hard, movements deliberate. There were no jokes, no casual chatter, not when they'd all seen the same feed Grant had. The jump to the Perseus frontier took 2 days. The tension built with every light year, the crew's focus narrowing until the ship felt like a drawn bowstring. When they arrived in the Vesper system, they found the moon hanging in silence. The colony was gone. Buildings flattened, hangars gutted, the once bustling landing pads littered with scorched debris. The only movement came from scavenger drones, picking apart the ruins for metal. But the Dravari weren't finished. Harris called it out first. "Multiple contacts, vectoring in from the dark side of the moon. Count 20, no 30 ships. Mixed formation, destroyers, cruisers, and..." He paused. 3 battleships. Grant's eyes narrowed. They've learned something. They're bringing bulk. The alien formation emerged like shadows peeling away from the lunar curve. Their hulls were darker than before. Broken with irregular plating, likely scatter armor designed to disrupt railgun targeting. Their formation was tight, protective, with the battleships in the center. Grant almost smiled. They'd studied him. That was good. It meant they were scared. "Bring us about. Range to lead ships?" 70,000 clicks and closing. Hold until they cross 60, then light them up. The Dravari made the first move. Energy lances flared from the battleships, cutting the void in straight, blazing lines. The Harrow's shields flared and held. Smaller ships launched clouds of micro-missiles, each one tumbling erratically to confuse point defense. "Point defense online," the gunnery chief barked, "clearing the swarms." Turrets stitched the black with bursts of fire, detonating missiles in brilliant blossoms. The Harrow rocked slightly under a few impacts, but nothing penetrated. 60 clicks, Harris said. "Fire." The dorsal railguns boomed, hurling tungsten death across the void. The first Dravari destroyer was torn open in an instant, its scatter armor useless at this velocity. The second and third followed, their midsections vanishing in sprays of molten metal. The aliens tightened formation, shielding their heavies. But Grant's targeting crew was already recalibrating, plotting trajectories that would arc through the gaps in their screen. Another volley slammed into the forward cruiser, breaking it apart in a chain of internal detonations. But the Dravari had adapted in other ways. A cluster of frigates broke from the main force, racing at impossible speeds toward the Harrow's flank. They weaved unpredictably, using a new drive burst pattern that made lock-on difficult. "They're going for our blind side," Harris warned. Grant's voice was steady. "They think we have one. Shift ventral batteries, catch them mid-drift." The gunnery chief was already there. As the frigates cut hard to swing behind the Harrow, the ventral turrets opened fire, each slug catching a target mid-curve. The alien ships came apart before they even finished their maneuver, their momentum scattering wreckage like shrapnel. Still, the main Dravari line was closing. At 40 clicks, their battleships unleashed full broadsides, columns of plasma thick as towers, hammering the Harrow's shields. "Shields at 87%, the engineering officer called. "Holding steady." Grant kept his tone calm. "Maintain fire. Focus on the rightmost battleship." The crew obeyed without hesitation. A concentrated salvo ripped into the target's bow, blowing apart its forward weapon banks. Secondary explosions cascaded down its spine, venting atmosphere and bodies into space. For the first time in the fight, the Dravari hesitated. Their center wavered. A captain less experienced than Grant might have pressed the attack then, but he held the line. The key to breaking an enemy wasn't to rush them when they stumbled, it was to let them know they were trapped. He waited, let them come another 10 clicks closer. Then he gave the order. "All rails, broadside pattern. Give me overlapping fields of fire." The Harrow's guns roared in unison. The tungsten storm swept the field, shredding 2 destroyers and crippling another cruiser in seconds. The second battleship took a glancing hit that peeled open half its midsection. The Dravari tried to return fire, but their coordination was fracturing. Too many ships gone, too many captains acting on fear instead of orders. Grant leaned forward, voice low. "Target their remaining battleship. End this." The gunnery crews worked like machines, adjusting for range, rotation, and shield harmonics. The next volley tore through the alien flagship's shields in a burst of blue light, the slug punching straight into its reactor core. The explosion lit the void like a false sunrise, sending shockwaves rippling through the wreckage. The survivors broke. Their formation collapsed entirely, ships scattering in every direction. The Harrow picked off 3 more as they fled, but Grant didn't bother with the pursuit. He knew what mattered now wasn't total destruction. It was the message. Silence fell over the bridge. The smell of ozone hung faintly in the air from the sustained weapons fire. Harris finally spoke, his voice almost casual. "Engagement time. 7 minutes, 19 seconds. The gunnery chief snorted. "They lasted longer than last time." Grant didn't answer. He was watching the debris drift in the black, thinking of Vesper Ridge, of the people who hadn't been saved in time. This battle hadn't been about victory, it had been about repayment, and repayment wasn't done. "Set course to follow the retreat vector of their largest group," he said finally. "We're not done hunting." The Harrow moved like a predator scenting blood. No patrol patterns, no broadcasted presence, just silent, cold-running drift through the stars along the retreat vector of the shattered Dravari fleet. Grant kept her weapons cold, hull heat synced, and drive emissions throttled to a whisper. They weren't here to announce themselves. They were here to end something. In the quiet of the bridge, only the low hum of the life support and the faint click of crew stations disturbed the stillness. The crew knew the unspoken truth. This was the first human warship to intentionally cross into Dravari-controlled territory. There would be no reinforcements, no safe retreat path, no second chances. Grant didn't seem bothered. If anything, there was a calm in him now that hadn't been there at Luna Dock. Out here, there were no committees to argue, no politics to navigate. Just an enemy who needed killing. Harris broke the silence first. Picking up residual warp signatures. The trail's fresh, less than 6 hours old. Vector? Straight toward the Ralvec system. According to charts, it's a forward resupply hub. Heavy traffic, multiple orbital platforms. Grant's mind was already running the math. Ralvec would be where the retreating Dravari regrouped, refueled, and patched their damage before heading deeper home. If they could catch them there, they wouldn't just hit the survivors, they'd gut the staging point itself. "Plot intercept," he said. "Silent approach until we're in system. Then, we'll see who's home." The jump into Ralvec was a knife sliding into soft flesh. No alarms, no detection, just the Harrow emerging from the warp shadow behind the outermost moon. And there it was. Harris brought the tactical overlay up on the main screen. 3 orbital platforms bristling with weapon turrets. A cluster of fuel tankers tethered together like bloated insects. 6 dry dock frames cradling damaged warships. At least 20 ships in orbit, some scarred from battle, others pristine. The survivors from the Perseus fight were there too. Hulks nursing fresh armor, scorch marks still visible along their hulls. Grant felt something cold settle in his gut when he saw them. They had run from Vesper Ridge after murdering civilians. Now they were safe, being patched up for another raid. Not for long. The crew moved without needing orders. Gunnery crews powered up silently. Targeting officers fed firing solutions into the system without chatter. Engineering rerouted every spare watt of reactor output into weapons and maneuvering thrusters. "Targets?" the gunnery chief asked quietly. "Priority. The dry docks holding the damaged warships," Grant said. "After that, fuel tankers. Platforms can wait until they know what's happening." Harris glanced over. "That's going to light the whole system on us in seconds." "Exactly," Grant said. The first railgun volley was almost too fast to process. One moment the Harrow floated in the dark, a shadow among stars. The next, 3 tungsten slugs were already halfway across the void. The first dry dock exploded in a shower of molten fragments as the slug tore through the warship inside and shattered its reactor. The second slug punched through a cruiser mid-repair, splitting it open like a carcass. The third obliterated a frigate before its systems even came online. The reaction was immediate. Sirens wailed across the Dravari comm channels, orders barked in their guttural tongue. The platforms pivoted, trying to bring their guns to bear, but the Harrow was already moving. "Evasive pattern Delta," Grant ordered. "Keep platforms on the edge of firing arcs. Maintain pressure on targets of opportunity." The ship slid sideways in space, thrusters firing in short, precise bursts. Another volley tore into the fuel tankers, and the result was spectacular. 3 linked together went up at once, a blinding fireball that engulfed half the dock area. Shards of superheated metal spiraled outward, punching into nearby ships and structures. Now the Dravari returned fire. Plasma bolts lanced through the black, tracing the Harrow's last position. Massive rail cannons on the platforms boomed, their slugs ripping past within 100 meters. "Shields at 91, engineering called. "Holding." "Keep them holding," Grant said. The Harrow weaved between debris clouds, using them as temporary cover. Every time a Dravari ship cleared its line of fire, a tungsten round cut it down. The survivors from the Perseus battle tried to regroup, but they were damaged and sluggish, their coordination already frayed. 2 more went under before they could even aim. Harris's tone sharpened. Captain, reading multiple warp signatures inbound. Heavy tonnage. Looks like reinforcements. Grant's gaze flicked to the timer in his head. They'd been here just over 3 minutes. That was enough. Final strike on the nearest platform, he said. Make it hurt. The gunnery chief grinned like a wolf. The Harrow swung in a wide arc, lining up a clean shot. All dorsal and ventral rails fired at once, a blinding storm that chewed through the platform's shields in seconds. The next wave of shots tore into its superstructure, splitting it into 3 drifting, burning sections. By then, the reinforcements were dropping into the fight. 8 capital ships, fresh and unscarred, appeared in tight formation, weapons live. The local Dravari survivors cheered over comms. Too soon. Grant didn't intend to fight them. Not here. Plot jump coordinates for the fallback vector, he said. Full burn until we're out of their interdiction zone. The Harrow's engines roared, heat sinks dumping stored energy in white streams. The Dravari reinforcements pivoted to pursue, but the debris fields, burning wreckage, and crippled allies in their path slowed them down. The Harrow cleared the interdiction bubble with seconds to spare. Jump, Grant ordered. Space tore, folded, and the Harrow was gone. When they re-emerged, it was deep in the empty stretch between Dravari border outposts. The crew exhaled as one, part relief, part adrenaline crash. The tactical map behind Grant was a mess of destroyed icons and damage estimates, the tally from Ralvec still being compiled. Casualties? Grant asked. None on our side, Harris said. Enemy losses, somewhere north of 15 hulls, 3 platforms crippled, 5 tankers destroyed, plus the repair yards. They won't be using Ralvec for months. The gunnery chief leaned back with a satisfied grunt. That'll slow them down. Grant didn't answer right away. He was thinking ahead, picturing the Dravari's response. This wasn't just a raid. This was a knife across the Empire's face, and predators didn't take scars lightly. They'll come for us now, he said finally. Not just with fleets. This time they'll hunt the ship itself. Harris's tone was grim. Then what's our move? Grant looked out at the starfield, the black void stretching forever. We keep going. Hit them where it hurts. Make them realize that every time they step into human space, the Harrow is already waiting for them, whether they see us or not. The Harrow's strike on Ralvec didn't just hurt the Dravari. It humiliated them. Within a day, every communication channel in their empire was bleeding with the news. The humans hadn't simply defended their borders. They had crossed into Dravari territory and burned a strategic hub to the ground. It was an insult too big to ignore. The response came faster than Grant expected. Intelligence intercepts from human listening posts in neutral systems painted a clear picture. The Dravari were mobilizing a fleet unlike anything seen in decades. 70 warships, 4 super dreadnoughts, an entire wing of stealth frigates, all of them moving toward a sector on the fringes of human space. Grant knew the number wasn't random. That was where they thought Harrow would be. Trap, Harris said flatly, leaning over the holo display in the war room. Grant studied the formation. The ships weren't just converging, they were creating a net, herding their prey toward a single point in deep space. No planets, no stations, just empty black. The kind of place you picked when you didn't want witnesses. They've learned, the gunnery chief muttered. They'll try to box us in, cut off our jump drives. Grant nodded. They'll have interdiction fields layered so thick we won't sneeze without triggering one. Admiral Soren's voice came over the secure line, tight and clipped. Grant, you're ordered to disengage from Dravari space and avoid contact until Fleet Command can muster reinforcements. Grant didn't even look up from the display. With respect, sir, if we pull back now, they'll think the trap worked. And next time, they'll spring it on a colony instead of us. Soren hesitated. You're walking into a fleet that could wipe out every ship we've got in this sector. Grant's voice was cold. Good thing they're not fighting every ship we've got. They're fighting me. The plan formed in his head like a blade being forged, sharp, simple, and dangerous. The Dravari were counting on Harrow to react like prey, avoiding contact until boxed in. But predators didn't run. Predators cut straight for the throat. Grant would not wait for the trap to close. He would punch through it before it was ready. 2 days later, the Harrow slid into the outer edges of the kill zone. The stars here felt wrong. Too still. Too empty. The crew moved at half volume. Every station manned, every eye scanning for movement. The first contacts appeared exactly where Grant expected. A ring of stealth frigates, barely visible against the void. They weren't attacking yet, just shadowing, waiting for the rest of the net to close. Frigates are pinging us, Harris reported. No weapons fire yet. They're not here to shoot, Grant said. They're here to keep us busy until the heavies arrive. Which gives us about 40 minutes before we're swimming in dreadnoughts, Harris added. Grant's eyes narrowed. Then we don't give them 40 minutes. The Harrow's engines flared to full burn, throwing her forward toward the nearest cluster of frigates. The sudden aggression caught the Dravari off guard. Their formation faltered as they tried to adapt. The first railgun volley erased 2 frigates instantly. The second scattered the survivors, their stealth fields collapsing as they went evasive. Keep pushing, Grant ordered. We punch a hole here before the big boys even arrive. The Harrow tore through the gap, leaving wreckage tumbling behind. But the Dravari weren't idle. The distant glow of capital ships was already brightening as the main fleet accelerated toward them. Reading 3 dreadnoughts on intercept, Harris called. 30 clicks and closing fast. The gunnery chief's tone was grim. We're not getting out clean if they get those interdiction fields up. They won't, Grant said. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the crew could feel the coiled steel beneath it. The Harrow pivoted mid-flight, targeting the lead dreadnought even as it charged. The railguns roared, the first slug smashing into the dreadnought's bow. Shields flared, but the second slug drove straight through, venting half its forward decks. The Dravari returned fire in a storm of plasma and rail slugs, the void between them lighting up like a furnace. The Harrow's shields flared white-hot under the pounding, alarms shrieking in engineering. Shields at 74! Grant didn't blink. Kill their drive. The gunnery crew answered with precision. 3 concentrated shots to the dreadnought's aft section, each one carving deeper until its main engine bloomed into an expanding fireball. The massive ship drifted, dead in space. But now the other 2 were closing. The interdiction field was building, warping space like invisible chains tightening around them. Harris's voice was tight. We've got a 2-minute window before the jump drive's locked out completely. Grant's tone was absolute. That's 1 minute more than we need. Target the second dreadnought. Full power. The Harrow's guns thundered again, pounding at the second ship's midsection until its armor buckled. A reactor breach followed, tearing the ship open from the inside. The third dreadnought hesitated, just for a second. But in battle, a second was forever. Grant took it. The Harrow swung around, dumping every remaining slug into its shield generators. When the shields collapsed, the next round drove straight through its bridge. The Dravari trap was collapsing before it had even fully closed. Jump drive clear, engineering reported. Interdiction fields disrupted. Grant gave the final order without hesitation. Jump! The stars folded, and the Harrow vanished, leaving 70 Dravari warships chasing ghosts in the dark. The Harrow didn't jump back to human space. She leapt deeper into enemy territory, moving through backwater routes so old and unmonitored that even the Dravari Navy barely remembered them. Grant had studied these paths for years: old smuggler trails, abandoned mining corridors, and the hollow shadows behind neutron stars where sensors went blind. The crew didn't ask where they were headed. By now, they understood. The captain wasn't running from the Dravari. He was running to them. 2 jumps later, the nav computer flagged a warning. Restricted system. The heart of the Dravari Empire. Their homeworld. From the bridge, the main display bloomed with the system's tactical map. At its center, the green sphere of Dravari Prime rotated slowly, haloed by orbital rings and station clusters. Around it hung the most formidable defensive network in their space: 50 warships in constant patrol, 6 orbital fortresses, and a lattice of automated weapons platforms that could vaporize a cruiser before it crossed the halfway mark to the planet. Harris whistled under his breath. "That's more guns than I've ever seen pointed in one direction." The gunnery chief grinned. "Looks like a challenge." Grant's eyes moved over the layout. He wasn't here to glass the planet. That was impossible with one ship. But hitting the right part of this defense grid? That would send a shockwave through the Dravari that no fleet engagement could match. The target was obvious: Ring Alpha, the largest orbital structure encircling Dravari Prime. It wasn't just a weapons hub. It was their command relay, the nerve center that coordinated the entire homeworld's defense network. If it went down, the other rings and platforms would be forced to operate independently, slower to react, and far easier to breach in the future. But Ring Alpha wasn't undefended. 2 battleships were docked directly alongside it, plus escort frigates patrolling its perimeter. The structure itself bristled with heavy turrets, shield arrays, and anti-capital ship torpedoes. Getting close meant surviving a gauntlet. "Stealth approach won't work here," Harris said. "Their sensor net's too tight. The second we cross the outer marker, they'll see us." "Good," Grant said. "I want them looking right at us." The Harrow broke cover and burned straight in, main drives flaring like a challenge thrown across the void. Dravari patrol ships scrambled, the 2 docked battleships detaching to intercept. The comms lit up with a transmission: deep, guttural Dravari speech. The translator kicked in halfway through. "Human vessel, suicide run, prepare to be erased." Grant ignored it. "Target the lead battleship. Ignore everything else until it's gone." The first railgun volley smashed into the battleship's bow, tearing through armor and venting atmosphere. The Dravari returned fire with every weapon they had: plasma storms, rail slugs, torpedo spreads, but the Harrow's shields held under the pounding. A second volley crippled the battleship's portside thrusters. It began to yaw, its massive bulk drifting helplessly. The third volley hit its reactor. The detonation lit the void, sending fragments spiraling into Ring Alpha's shielding. By now, the entire defensive grid was active. Turrets along the ring spat streams of tracer fire and energy lances, forcing the Harrow into constant evasive maneuvers. The second battleship tried to swing around for a broadside, but Grant cut across its path, hammering its shield generators until they failed. A single tungsten slug through the midsection ended it. "Clear path to the ring," Harris called. "Shields at 68. "Maintain heading," Grant said. They closed in, weaving through fire so thick it painted the bridge in flickering light. The Harrow's railguns boomed again and again, each shot tearing deeper into Ring Alpha's armored shell. The first impacts shredded its external weapons arrays. The next volley targeted its communications spines, snapping them like brittle bone. The Dravari scrambled to adjust. Frigates swarmed in from both flanks, hoping to pin the Harrow against the ring's defensive grid. "Secondary batteries, sweep the flanks," Grant ordered. The ventral and dorsal turrets opened up, slashing through the frigates at point-blank range. Wreckage drifted away in glowing chunks. With the escorts gone, the Harrow closed to killing range. "Target the command core," Grant said, voice low and steady. "One shot." The gunnery chief locked the firing solution. The bridge went silent except for the deep, resonant hum of the rail capacitors charging to maximum. Then, boom! The slug crossed the gap in under a second, punching through the ring's primary shield generator and tearing a molten corridor straight through the central hub. Internal explosions rippled outward, chunks of the ring breaking loose as secondary systems failed. The once perfect halo around Dravari Prime now had a smoking gap, debris scattering in a slow spiral toward the planet below. Grant didn't linger. The moment the ring's command node went dark, he ordered a hard burn away from the system. Every remaining warship in the defense fleet turned to pursue, but without the relay's coordination, their response was fractured and slow. The Harrow punched back into warp, leaving the Dravari homeworld's proudest fortress broken and burning in its own sky. The crew didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They all knew what they'd done, what it meant. No one had ever hit the Dravari home system and lived to tell it. Now, every sentient in the galaxy would know it was possible. Grant stood at the forward display, watching the stars slide past in warp. "Send a message to Fleet Command," he said. "4 words. The ring is gone." The gunnery chief chuckled darkly. "That's going to keep them awake at night." Grant's eyes stayed on the black beyond. "Good. Fear keeps them honest." The destruction of Ring Alpha hit the Dravari harder than any fleet loss. Warships could be rebuilt, crews could be replaced, but the orbital command ring around their homeworld had been the symbol of their dominance for generations, a shield that no enemy had ever breached. Its burning gap was a wound they couldn't hide, a message broadcast in every direction. The humans had walked into the heart of the Empire and torn out a piece of it. Grant knew it wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a political earthquake, and earthquakes made people desperate. 3 days later, while the Harrow drifted in the shadow of a dead moon far from any trade lane, the comms lit up with an unexpected signal. Harris frowned. "Encrypted channel, origin point inside Dravari space. It's not military. Looks like a diplomatic encryption." Grant's expression didn't change. "Put it through." The holo that bloomed above the console showed a Dravari figure clad in ceremonial armor, its scales polished to a mirror sheen. The translator identified him as Lord Keeper Vesh, an envoy of the Imperial High Council. His voice came low and controlled, but the strain behind it was obvious. "Human Captain, the Dravari Empire seeks cessation of hostilities. Terms to be negotiated." Grant didn't speak immediately. He let the silence stretch, watching the envoy's eyes flicker with unease. "You've lost fleets, worlds, and now part of your homeworld's defense," Grant said finally. "You think you can talk now and wipe the slate clean?" Vesh's mandibles twitched. "The Empire will recognize human territorial claims, establish formal boundaries, and guarantee non-aggression." Grant stepped closer to the console. His voice was calm, but there was steel under every word. "Not enough. You don't get to walk away after slaughtering civilians at Vesper Ridge." The envoy's gaze hardened. "Then what do you demand?" When Grant spoke, he didn't raise his voice, but everyone on the bridge stopped what they were doing to listen. "First, you will publicly acknowledge your defeat at Ralvek and at your homeworld. Second, you will compensate every human colony you attacked. Credits, materials, technology. Third," his eyes narrowed, "you will dismantle your forward bases within 10 light-years of human space. Permanently." Vesh hissed. Unacceptable. These terms are the only reason you're still talking to me instead of watching the Harrow turn your supply lines into dust. Grant cut in. I've been to the heart of your empire, Vesh. If I go back, I won't be leaving pieces behind next time. The envoy's jaw worked, but he didn't reply immediately. After a long pause, he inclined his head. I will carry your terms to the High Council. The transmission ended. The crew waited in silence. Harris was the first to break it. Think they'll go for it? Grant shook his head slightly. They'll come back with counteroffers. They always do. The trick is making them think we're ready to hit them again if they stall too long. The gunnery chief smirked. That part shouldn't be hard. The negotiations stretched over the next 2 weeks. Messages passed through encrypted channels, each side testing the other. The Dravari tried to pare the demands down. Grant didn't budge. Finally, the envoy returned with a message signed by the Emperor himself. The Dravari Empire would meet all 3 terms. Fleet Command wanted Grant back at Sol for a full ceremony, the kind they could broadcast to every colony and outpost. But Grant declined the parades and medals. He left the Harrow in dry dock for her first real maintenance in months. The ship's blackened rails and scored plating a quiet testament to the months of war she'd survived. He walked the docks alone, ignoring the salutes and stares. Victory wasn't about banners and speeches. It was about knowing the Dravari wouldn't cross the line again, not because they respected the treaty, but because they feared what would happen if they broke it. In the spacer bars of the outer colonies, the story grew larger with every retelling. They said the Harrow had fought 10 fleets single-handed, that Captain Grant had stood alone in the Dravari throne room and given the Emperor his terms, that the Dravari still had nightmares about the 4 minutes it took a single human ship to erase their first invasion fleet. Grant didn't correct them. Legends had their uses. On the final day before the Harrow went back to sea, Admiral Soren visited the dock. He didn't waste time on small talk. You know what you've done, Grant? Stopped a war, Grant said. Soren shook his head. You've made humanity impossible to ignore. Every power out there will be watching us now. Some will want to trade, others will want to test us, and some will want to prove the Harrow was a fluke. Grant gave a faint smile. Then they'll find out the hard way it wasn't. When the Harrow left port again, her course was unannounced, her mission classified. The galaxy didn't know where she was going, but the Dravari knew she was out there. And that was enough to keep them honest. For now.